Yeah, I didn't make it to the Berlinale this year, and that is the very selfish reason why I actually created this event tonight. I just really wanted to live vicariously through Cameron and Magali.
We're not going to always do this for you.
Really, going to save me this ticket. Exactly. We're glad to have you guys here for a change, so to speak, because we spend so much time over at the Lightbox. It's funny, when we just mentioned the 5 years ago, immediately I was like, it's like BC and, it's like before Lightbox and after Lightbox, or with Lightbox. Let me take this opportunity just for the record to say it out loud. TIFF is one of the best partners, the best arts partners I think the Goethe-Institut in Canada has. It's always a pleasure to work with every single one of your staff members. That team over there is fantastic. We'll be there again in about 10 days, so I'll tell you a bit more about that. We'll really just leave those 3 guys to talk amongst each other and to involve you as much as possible. Please don't be shy with your questions. You'll sort of self-moderate and wrangle it, but I thought I'd sort of throw you a ball and start it out. Maybe each of you can just very briefly say, what was your best moment at the Berlinale? What was your, I don't want to say worst, maybe most annoying, most boring, you choose moment. And I guess Cameron might be excused if he doesn't have a 2013 reference. He was ill for some part of this festival.
My best moment was surviving.
That's something too. Yeah, it always feels like that. But I think it's your 20-plus festival, so you may reference anything.
22nd, 23rd.
Yeah, right. You can reference anything back into the 90s and sort of give it a bit of perspective. So off you go.
Sure. As Jutta said, thank you first of all for having us. Let me see. I've been going to the Berlinale for a long time. I first went in 1991 as almost a student. I was certainly living like a student at the time, staying with friends. And I've seen the growth over the years. And for me, I think what's interesting now is to go as a colleague and in a way as a competitor. We are the 2 largest public film festivals in the world, each with about 300,000 or so attendees. And so we're always interested to see what the Berlinale is doing, because it's kind of a mirror reflection of what we try to do in Toronto, although of course our programming missions are perhaps a little bit different, but how we exist as large public film festivals trying to screen films for a pretty wide range of audiences is pretty much exactly the same. We're also the 2 festivals that take place in big cities. We're not resort destination festivals like Sundance or Cannes or Karlovy Vary, places like that. We thrive, I think, in the urban culture that is our context. So that's always interesting to see. And lately, especially, I think the Berlinale's had these interesting films that have done well there and gone on to really long lives. We had great success playing Pina in our building after its success premiering at the Berlinale. The Iranian film is Separation, of course, which won the Academy Award last year for Best Foreign Language Film, premiered in Berlin.
Won a prize.
And won a prize there, exactly. And then Rebelle, the film by Kim Nguyen, the Canadian filmmaker, also premiered last year at the Berlinale and did very well. So now, in addition to going and seeing how they're doing and seeing if we're still at the same level or how we compare to the Berlinale, I think we're also looking for films that we think will have a very long life on the festival circuit, but also as actual commercial releases, which is maybe somewhat new. I think the Berlinale films didn't always have that kind of success.
No worse moments yet?
I was sick the whole time, so I actually...
No holds barred.
Yeah,
I spent about a day and a half in my
right?
hotel room in Potsdamer
Love
Platz,
so
so that was not so nice.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was my 2nd year there, which was very different from last year because I was on the Teddy Awards jury last year, so it's a very focused schedule. You see so many films under that jury that it doesn't leave you a lot of time to see anything else, but you do get a wide scope of the films in that section, of course. This year was a much shorter trip as well. It was 5 nights, 6 days. I did not get sick, thank God. Got sick of the movies. But so it was a very packed 5 days. It was screening still, into the night. So not so much a social trip as very much in dark screening rooms. For me, my mission is when I go there this year, especially, is to, as Cameron has alluded to, concentrate on the commercial releases that may come out of some of these films there, Certainly, of course, make suggestions to festival programmers and myself about what I see there, what I think would play well in Toronto, but also to see which of the ones we can already target and start these discussions. So, you know, discussions for festivals start early, but discussions for commercial releases also really do. You know, we live in a world of a cineplex, of cineplexes, and the company's actually named Cineplex in this case. So the big box cinemas that have more screens than ever downtown and across the country. So, you know, the competition is intriguing and not always easy, and we need to target films much in advance so that we start our battles to convince distributors that they should play with us and what we can do for them. So it's a mix of festival interest and light box year-round interest for me. So I don't know how many films I saw. I think the toughest part of the Berlinale is if you're going to go to the market, which is the non-selected film. Well, some of the selected films are also in the market, but literally like 1,000 films are not selected by anyone. They're just placed in the market for sale, is to try to find gems. So I was instructed to go find gems in 1,000 random movies, and it's really hard. So you basically go in these industry screenings for 10 minutes at a time. Like, you go from cinema to cinema. Hopefully you go in one of the complexes that has 10 screening rooms, and you literally pop in. It's annoying for everyone, but everyone does it, and it's sort of the nature of the game. And you kind of know right away if a film's for you or not. It's not so much for enjoying for a full 90 minutes. It's really to think, okay, not for us, move on. And if you do find certain films that are interesting, totally not in the map of the selected films, therefore have absolutely no press, it's a matter of literally talking to distributors, Canadian distributors, and saying, I saw this little film you may want to watch, because much like me and everyone else, they have a hard time trying to figure out what this list of 1,000 films can do for them and how to even decipher it and where to look. I did find a few films in that category. It took a long of painful 10 minutes that made 0 sense, and like from, you know, all kinds of films. And I would say the documentaries were the ones that on average were the more interesting ones. Our building plays documentaries very, very well and successfully, and especially, for example, food documentaries have done gangbusters at the Lightbox. So of course we're always looking for that, but not just that, because we don't want to exhaust everyone's passion for food forever and ever by watching too many films about them. And I saw this documentary about drinks, which is a personal interest of mine. Hopefully a lot of our audience. So that's how my experience looked like.
A blur.
A blur. I just went to the list.
How did you miss the drinks one?
That was not on my schedule. So unlike Magali, I was very sober for the entire time. but I'm looking for the opposite end of the spectrum, which is very non-commercial. So I oversee the wavelength section at TIFF, which has recently combined with the vision section. So it's a larger section focused on avant-garde works, boundary-pushing works, either formally or in storytelling. And also we're looking at works from visual artists working in moving images. And the interesting thing for me about the Berlinale is that they work very well with the visual arts community there. They're working with galleries, studio tours that they're doing, installations all over town. So to talk about my most interesting experience, it was held in a crematorium, which is very unusual. But the Berlinale, the Forum Expanded, which is an offshoot of the Forum, which focuses solely on installations and avant-garde shorts programs. Their base was in an old crematorium in a working class neighborhood called Wedding. And one of my favorite films last year that we premiered after Locarno was called Leviathan, which is a documentary. Thank you.
Wow. One of the best films last year.
Right.
It really was.
So those of you who haven't seen it yet, in 2 weeks' time it'll be playing at the Lightbox. So this is a very non-commercial film on fishing off the New Bedford coast, and it came out of Harvard, and in their ethnography department, which is called sensory ethnography. So it makes you feel things in a very physical way. And some people have been sick during the screenings. You feel like you're on the boat. The two filmmakers were on the boat for 6 months. Verena Paraval, one of the co-directors, actually went to the hospital 6 times They both lost an insane amount of weight. You want to talk about food and dieting, go on a boat for 6 months. But the offshoot of this, the film, it was always designed to be a film and installations. And so they did 3 separate installations at the crematorium. And Sonia, did you see it? Did you see it? And so they actually went there early to scout out the building. And so it was very site-specific to the architecture and really, really moving and, yes, quite creepy. So you walk down a corridor and you feel all these ghosts that they really feel like they caught on their cameras. And they were projected in these little nooks. And then in one big area was a huge vaulted nave, and you know the doors were closed, completely quiet, and they had 2 projectors, and they were projecting the fish and the seagulls, and it was all engulfing. They had bean bags, and people just chilled out. And you lied there, you realize that you're in a crematorium that probably is filled with ghosts, you know, based on what your belief system is, and it was a huge, huge success for them. They quadrupled, I believe, the attendance for Form Expanded this year because of this. And so it was really great for me to be there too with the 2 filmmakers because we had been a part of their experience, and so that was probably my highlight, I think, of this year's. And the first year that I attended was 2006, and Cameron, so sweetly, I know you probably don't remember, you toured me of all around the venues,
Yes.
showed me all the
Wow.
shortcuts at Potsdamer, because I was so confused at Potsdamer Platz, because
Yeah.
it's a triangle, it's very impressive architecture, and you'll respond to it. Cameron gave me focal points, which was really great. But that was the same year that the forum section launched, Forum Expanded. So I've always been seeing the growth of that program, which has been really great in following it. And they're really great colleagues of mine in terms of wavelengths. So we share tips and we share filmmakers. The quite a bit different on their end is that they're also a distributor. So the films that they're sending me are actually films that they represent. And the thing that I've always loved about the forum, and I'm not sure if everybody knows what the forum is, it's the Berlinale, but it was kind of designed as a counter to the competition, and it was like the boundary pushing sidebar that was started by Erica and Ulrich Greger, 2 of the most amazing film curators and critics. And they launched this as kind of an avant-garde venture. And something that they had always set aside was funding to subtitle films as well, because they wanted to ensure that the films would have a life outside of the festival circuit. So they set up a distribution arm and an archive, and which is now the Arsenal, which is really great. So those were my highlights, but on that, because I will be a little bit critical, my disappointment is the forum in general. I think that it's lacking the political kind of verve that it used to have, the urgency that it used to have. I feel like it's a picture of world cinema. Some of the films are they're not memorable, and there are always a few gems, and that's where you'll see like a really great James Benning film or a Heinz Emmigoltz film, and then a really great, new talent from Berlin, as I saw this year. But on the whole, it's not as curatorially cohesive as it used to be.
I think that's a really good point. Most of you will know that the Berlinale has a history of very serious political engagement, and it's the sort of festival where even today, at its opening ceremonies, politicians will get up and speak about the situation in Mali or in Syria, and it's amazing. It's something that we would never even think of doing at Roy Thomas Hall. And also, we don't have the politicians to do that. But that's part of the Berlinale's history, and so we look to the Berlinale to kind of carry the flag for that kind of cinema. I mean, if Cannes is a festival where cinema is kind of an aesthetic object, I think Berlin has always been a festival where cinema is a kind of an instrument that can actually achieve things in the real world, it can do something. And it's disappointing to hear that, at least in the forum section, that it seems to have less potency than it used to.
I mean, one thing that it continues to do is it acknowledges the history of cinema, which I think is really important, especially when you're there to discover new work. There's always going to be a sidebar. So this year was Kinoshita, last year they also did a Japanese sidebar, and they'll always incorporate history, which I think is great that the festival has done that and continued to do that, because that was something that the Gregers really stood for and believed in. So they'll have restorations of old work, and then when you're discovering new work, and you know that dialogue is still happening, but just when you're watching 4 or 5 films a day, after the 4th day, and you take a look at what you've seen, and you know that you're not going to remember most of these. So in a way, I mean, this is another conversation that we all have, are festivals too big? Is there a lot of surplus there? And that's a very contentious discussion to have too for all kinds of reasons.
Where would you, because we often compare festivals with the films, of course. Where do you think we stand versus them in terms of the installation stuff that we show and they show size and kind of stuff?
Yeah, very, very different. Future Projections is our installation program. It's quite a bit smaller than theirs. They've really built this up, and they have a huge team of curators who are working for other museums. So there are now 5 curators who work on the program, which is similar to size, but we are 2 to 3 internal curators max, whereas they're 5. They're bringing brain trust from other institutions who are essentially touring the world and going to biennials, like Guangzhou Biennial, Sao Paulo Biennial. So you're seeing that caliber of work, which works sometimes within a festival, and sometimes not, because they're also taking fragments from those biennials and projecting them in the shorts programs, which is not always making sense with the experimental films. And we're hearing that from the audience as well.
Interesting. You talked about about architecture, and to me, the fact that the location of the Berlinale is really important. I think that's one of the key parts about it, and the fact that it's able to use these incredible buildings. Some of them brand new, but some of the older buildings that have these incredible histories behind them. Sometimes quite ominous histories, but how they've been kind of reinvented through the work that's shown in them is interesting. And I wonder if that's also one of the differences between what we can do in terms of installation work in Toronto and what they can do in Berlin.
Absolutely.
Because they have Berlin as a kind of a canvas.
No, there was a project that I worked on last year for 3 months, and in the end we couldn't do it because we couldn't find a proper space for it. It didn't fit a belt light box. It was very large and needed special screens, and we couldn't make it work. And I was speaking with Lucian and Verena about this piece, and I could not think of a you couldn't put this piece in a museum or a gallery. It would lose all of its might. And they also use big institutions like the Hamburger Bahnhof. I mean, they have really great partners. And next year they're moving into the Kunstwerk, and they're taking all 4 floors. So they're forming a really great alliance between the Arsenal and the Kunstwerk year-round to do artist talks, screenings, which I think is going to be really great. And just another note on the crematorium is that the Arsenal is contemplating moving their film collection to the crematorium. The crematorium is not functioning anymore, but of course the temperature to store dead bodies is it's very apropos for celluloid. So there's all this equipment and space down there, and they're going to be using it. So the crematorium is actually, I believe it was bought by an architectural firm, and it's being turned into a cultural center. But it's very striking. You walk there, and it's like right out of a fairy book. There's huge gates, and then there's the angel of death that greets you. And
in a way, I actually like that, because when the Berlinale moved from West Berlin, former West Berlin, to Potsdamer Platz, I really felt like it lost something, because all of the buildings in Potsdamer Platz are new. It was flattened essentially for many years. And I felt that the kind of the texture of the city was lost. You couldn't find those old spaces anymore, and the history that you kind of walked through when you were walking through Berlin in the West was all gone. So it's great that they're using, even if it's a crematorium.
Absolutely. Well, they also used a spa.
Really?
Did you go? No. I had never heard of this, but the Liquidrome, I guess, is a spa that people go to in Berlin, and has a big swimming pool. And
that's in the Tom Tickver film.
Yes.
3.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, they used it for one of their installations. So Hilio Otinga is a Brazilian artist no longer living, and his nephew made a documentary about him using found footage, and it was in the Forum. It actually won the Caligari Award. And they did offshoots to show some of his work, and his work has been slightly contentious because he worked with cocaine. He made coca works. And he was also a gay artist, quite subversive. So they partnered with the Hamburger Bahnhof to show some of his coca works. And then they had one night at the Liquidrome where, in order to actually participate in the work, you had to put on a bathing suit and get into the pool, and they were projecting on you, and you could only hear what was happening underneath because their speakers were in the pool. So, but I did not attend. I was in the crematorium without my bathing suit.
You have to make choices.
Yeah. So I've, to a certain degree, back to your point, I kind of envy their flexibility in terms of the access that they have and the buildings that they have. Yeah.
Magali, because I barely got to see films while I was there, did you see anything that you think, and you probably can't name titles, but that could be Pina or could be a separation that could actually have that kind of commercial life?
Pina was like wildly popular. It became wildly commercial in a way that I don't think will be repeated soon. Like
There's that
art
film
houses.
Gloria, for instance. That
Yeah, I think
loved.
Gloria will be sort of the. I love.
Did you love it? Okay.
I,
People know about
yes.
this film? Do you want to?
It's the Chilean film starring Paulina Garcia, who I did not really know before, but I know she's had quite a long career, about this middle-aged woman who has been single for many, many years, a bit semi-estranged from her kids, sees them, but not as much as she'd like. And she's just one of those women or people who take courses of everything. So she's very out there. She takes dancing classes, laughing classes, like ballroom dancing, anything. She's very fun. She drinks a lot. Role model. Gee, that's a foreshadowing. And she starts a new relationship with a man who's about 70 years old, and it's sort of, can people change their ways when they've been sort of single for a long time and sort of cementing their little habits? It's a comedy, but it's a drama comedy. It's a very honest, completely humanist film. It sort of hits all the marks that I think were a lot of the films that we are interested in, at least for a strata of the festival, and then for Lightbox as well, are interested in, which are accessible films for cinephiles and big public. Like it's a film for everyone. I don't think I've seen anyone in Berlin 2 weeks ago who did not love this film. It was the best reviewed film, or the second best reviewed film of the competition. The actress is sort of the runaway prize. She won Best Actress, of course.
And we
It was bought for U.S. distribution as
and
well,
it was bought
right?
for U.S.
So
and
it will turn up.
It
In
will.
Canada as well? Or?
It will turn up. It's not yet, the deal for Canada is not been made yet, but it for sure is inevitably going to happen. And I think it could be one of the sort of foreign hits of the year for sure. She'll get noticed, I think, in the U.S. as well. It's those kinds of strong performances that
I
are
didn't
just
see it, but
completely wonderful.
it sounded like if it's handled well by the right distributor, that it actually could get an Oscar nomination, could even get a nomination for the actress who plays Gloria.
Although Juliette Binoche will probably be nominated for Camille
I don't
Claudel.
Yeah.
I think she
Did you
will.
see
Not
it?
that I think she has to be nominated, but it sort of screams nomination. That role, the whole thing. But yeah, Gloria was, and then I embarrassed myself in front of the actress at the party, so that was that. But hopefully this film will make it to Toronto somehow. I'm sure it will, whether it's in a festival setting or a release setting or both or whatever. But it's a big hit. I think another strong moments was not only his Silver Bear win, but the fact that Denis Coté, the French-Canadian filmmaker, was in the competition with Vic and Flo and ended up winning the Silver Bear.
Not Silver Bear, one, the Alfred Bauer.
Alfred Bauer, sorry. And
Innovation.
And it was, the screenings went really well. It's a very odd film. If you've heard a little bit about it, the last 10 minutes are very intense, and I won't say more.
Don't give it away.
I won't give it away. But it's a harsh movie, but one that is likely going to travel much more. His films usually I think go to about 200 festivals each, so he sort of does the map of festivals very well, and he's a big deal for Canada, I think.
It's great that he was in competition.
It's great that it's only 20
It was a good year
films.
for Canada overall, right?
Well, yeah, every
Pretty
year we
strong.
have this, fabulous party at the Canadian Embassy, and then they call up all the talent, and there was like 35 or 40 people up
Yes,
on
last
stage.
year it was like 40, 50 people, right?
Yeah, but I think half of the talent campus was Canadian.
Yeah, there was a lot of young filmmakers in the campus, which is great, and all filmmakers we've followed, in the last 5-10 years. So, and Inshallah, which was at TIFF last year, was in Berlin this year. So these are two big ones. I think Camille Claudel will do well wherever it goes. And one that I actually liked was Long and Happy Life, the Russian film, which to me had something Québécois about it. I talked to peers after, and we both agreed to that. We both said it. We're like, wow, that's crazy. You felt that too for a Russian film, and set in a rural setting and all that. So it's got this sort of, if you see a lot of Quebec films, which is totally okay if you don't, but I understand.
But not
has this sort of, the rural quest to keep things as they are and not embrace either technology or big business a lot. So that's a very recurrent thing. Even Quebec cinema has even accused often of sort of staying in that mode a lot. A lot of filmmakers sort of, very urban filmmakers go shoot back in where they're from or where their parents have a farm and all that. Like I literally could name you 4 filmmakers who lived downtown Montreal their whole life and go back to write and shoot in their parents' farms in the countryside. And these stories, like you look at them and they occur in 2012 or 2010 or whatever, but you could think they are in the 70s or any other decade because they're, other than the cars, there are no signs that the world has changed. There's never internet in these settings. Like it's sort of this odd attachment to this.
It's where someone's, you know, an artist's imagination is, and that that's not unusual. I mean, often immigrant writers, filmmakers, artists especially also go back to, you know, the homeland in terms of what they do. Reminding me of the Thomas Arslan film, which again I didn't get a chance to see, but it seems like a lot of the German filmmakers, their imagination is now overseas. It's actually not in Germany anymore. I mean, this one was shot in British Columbia, as I recall. And a lot of the most interesting German films that I'm seeing now when I go to Munich every year are shot outside of Germany somewhere. It just seems to be, I'm not sure why that's happening.
Vednos is planning
Is it a
to go
matter
to
of-
northern Quebec.
There was Pia Marais as well.
Pierre Marais.
Is it a matter of budget?
No, I don't think
No,
so.
it's a matter of German
Story,
soul
plot.
Yes.
I don't know enough about
wanting to go.
living in Germany as an artist to say, but I think often artists may find other places feel like there is more narrative, there's more of interest there, there's more happening in a very stable society like most of urban Germany. Maybe the filmmakers feel like they can't find stories, although certainly Fassbinder didn't have any problem, right? But they might feel like they can't do that anymore, I don't know.
I think it might be a freedom thing. Like if you do something in even an environment that you're unfamiliar with, it sort of frees you of representation of where you may be coming from or the people around you. You sort of don't owe a foreign place really any background of yours or anything.
It's true, yeah.
But I think
But Gold is shot,
well, I mean, for Thomas Arslan, I mean, he's made so many films in Kreuzberg. I mean, he's represented the Turkish community for years and years and years in Germany. And, you know, his films are very the same in some respects. I like them. I mean, I think he's one of the greatest German filmmakers working today. There's no real high point. His characters wander around. They're trying to figure things out. They're artists. They're drug dealers. They're just living their lives. They're serial killers. But like it's kind of monotonous, you know. It's like a real serial killer. It's serial, but I think there was a lot riding on this one because he had a big star, and I think that the Nina Haas connection, you know, catapulted him into competition with a film that wasn't as strong as his last film, In the Shadows, which I think is a pitch-perfect film, which was in the Forum. But the expectations changed so much. And this was his first period piece. It's shot in Dawson, and it's about the gold rush, and it is about German immigrants and them continuously riding horses. And they're still riding and riding, and then the horses die in a really fantastic way. No gold. But the most incredible thing is that, and I spoke to a couple of people on Thomas's team, Arslan's team, about this, is that they didn't use any drugs for the horses. They were so perfectly trained that when they died, they literally just like fell like this. Like it was the most amazing thing. You just want all the horses to fall, right? So like there's a kind of like, you know, there's a comedy built in that I don't think a lot of people get in the film.
I think Andréa thinks they're comedy.
No.
We've been arguing about this film. So
A revisionist Western film. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. I think he had limited budget. You know that they're going around the same river 4 times. That's okay. There's a very strange sunset, but it adds this like quality of bizarreness to the film. I like it.
No, I'm glad you liked it because it
I'm
totally.
a defender.
But I was glad that you did that because we gathered for dinner at some point, and
You were still talking about Gloria.
I was still upset and embarrassed with what I did, but I didn't say where I work, so if I see her again, it's fine. And right away sort of jumped into what we saw today, and I sort of very quickly dismissed Gold. I thought people will want to see it, and I wanted to see it even if I heard sort of negative comments about it. And we started talking about it, and you right away were like, oh, no, I loved it.
Yeah, I think
And
it's really strong.
I think the fact that say the same film without Nina Haas in the Forum I would have read it completely differently. I think I fell very quickly without thinking the fact that it's a competition film. I saw it with more commercial eyes, not because of my work, but I think just because she was in it and the success of Barbara was even bigger than we expected. It was wonderful. And it sort of twisted it that way. And
The competition puts weird.
it does
It
put a
strange
weird
pressure on the
filter
films.
on how you see certain
But,
things.
I mean, with any country's national cinema, I think how they choose the films that are going to be from
Yeah.
that nation in competition is very complex, and it's not always necessarily the most commercial or the ones of highest artistic achievement. They have to satisfy lots of different
Yeah.
factors in terms of
Including business ones.
yes, exactly, taking
Of
place
course.
in competition. So who knows why gold is in competition as opposed to some other section? I think Nina Hoss is probably a part of it,
Yeah.
but I'm sure there were other factors as well. Was that the only German film in competition? Or was there
The other ones were all co-pros. There's a lot of
Yeah,
the-
initially it was Pierre Murray's
Pierre
film,
Murray.
Oh, yeah,
also
that's right.
counts of course,
Yeah.
but being said abroad, he is Swedish, South African historians.
yeah.
In the German media, it was touted as gold as the only
the
German
one.
film in
Right.
competition, and it got clobbered by the German media. But then the German media are very brutal, right?
Yeah.
Like Spiegel hated it. Debug magazine loved it.
Yeah.
And,
And
they were on the
Revolver.
humorous side.
Yeah.
They kept saying how humorous it is and everything. Yes.
Yeah, and the New York Times, Le Monde, Revolver magazine. I mean, it's got
Yeah,
champions.
Revolver's
You know?
fun.
So are there any films that you can tell us about maybe that we can expect to see in September? at
Absolutely
TIFF?
not.
I mean, I know a lot of it has to be like, is it going to Cannes? You know, what other festivals is it going to and stuff like that?
Any, you heard it here first.
I wish. If we close the room for 7 months, then yes, I can.
Nobody. But no,
Exactly.
how does it work? Is it
Sign.
that you can't say for strategic reasons, or is we know that you go to Munich in fairly
In
late
late June.
in
Late
yeah,
June,
in the
early
summer,
July.
it's always nerve-wracking for us already to not know what you're gonna, because that's when you sit down at German films, it helps you see some more films. But do you come back and you, like all of you, do you go like, yeah, that one, if we're gonna get rights and it comes out, we're gonna, that one we're gonna do. How many is it, 2, 3? And my other
Depends.
related question would be, do you even go to Berlin to look out for great or not so great German films, or is it really for you, I find more Eastern European films there than I find German films, the German films come later, or?
I think we have to pay attention to the German films because there have been successes, Barbara, Pina, etc. So every year, it seems, especially recently, there has been at least one significant German film that will come to the festival. So we have to see those and consider them. We often don't make decisions on whether we're inviting them until much later. So it's really early. We haven't invited anything yet, and we're not likely to for a while. So we'll typically see things and then just sit and see some more until probably after Cannes is where we can really start to pull the trigger on invitations. But then really the most of the work is done in terms of what I select from Germany. I'm some of the programmer for Germany. It is done in late June, early July when I go to Munich, and I'm able to see everything. There's often some films in Cannes that we will consider as well, but actually not that many, because Cannes doesn't have a big track record in fighting German films. Probably a sore point.
3 years. Yes. Sometimes we count the Austrians sometimes. Then it looks
Right.
better.
Okay.
Inside of the.
But yeah, most of that's done there. But then, Andréa's looking at German films. Dimitri Epidis is looking at German films as well. So in their travels, they're also seeing films that may play at, say, Locarno or probably Murray somewhere else as well.
I mean, there are several, or at least 2 really important films that I saw at the Berlinale last year for Wavelines. One was Miguel Gomez's Taboo, which also won the Alfred Brauer Prize. And Nicolas Rey's Anders Malusia, which is a French-German film on Gunther's Anders, which I saw there. I'd been tracking it for a number of years, but it premiered there. And again, we didn't really decide on that film until June, but it was on my hold list for some time. So there's always 2 or 3. I was shown a James Benning film or Heinz Emigold's film. Last year, for instance, the Heinz Emigold film, I didn't see it in Berlin, but I took an afternoon off and I went to his studio and he showed me the latest cut. So that's also a really important aspect of the Berlinale for me, is that kind of the center of the art world is really there because rent is really cheap for artists. So I go a couple of days early and I do a number of studio tours for our installation program as well. That's how I got the Thomas de Man, for instance. Tacita Dean's there. So you have big artists and you just try to spend time with them. And so I can already say, that I've had meetings with gallerists and artists where I'll be bringing work from Berlin, but they were not in the Berlinale. and that's increasingly become part of my Berlinale experience. Like I have to make sure to see all the galleries in Kreuzberg, and you know, so.
Questions?
Comment. I don't have a question. I'm from Quebec, and I've been here 40 years.
Congratulations on your film scene.
You know what? I really miss the days. I don't see any film anymore except Pina and Never Sorry and those documentaries, right? I used to take 10 days off at work and just go and see all the films, because in those days it was much easier. Now it's such a big exercise to run, to be on time, to get up early and try to get that it's too much work.
Yeah.
So I stopped after 25 years. I did 25 years straight, everything. I always had, when I was working also at the CBC at some point, and I really enjoy it. But now I'm like, hello, forget it. I go to TIFF. I did the Real Artist Film Fest. I saw all the films last weekend, and I do a lot of those small films. And it's the same thing in Quebec, but it's good for Toronto to have TIFF. Of course, it's very important, it's very much on the map, but for just the people. And in those days, we were like 200 journalists. I work at CBC as an arts reporter, I'm telling you. There were not many. Even like 2 o'clock in the morning, the filmmaker would say, hey everybody, I'm going to for a drink at this place, you want to come with me? I missed that. Egoyan used to sit with me. We had a bar, and I saw him this week with his wife. And I know a lot of people in the industry, but it just became too much. So you know how many films I see these days? Nothing much.
I know what you're saying.
I don't say this for you because
No,
it's
of course.
good.
And look, I mean, I know what you mean, because I've also been, attending
Stop.
the festival for a long time, and a festival like Berlin for a long time as well. Things do change. I mean, I remember, when I first started going to the Berlinale, there was a place called Terzo Mundo in Berlin where people would end up at the end of the night, and the owner would come out with his guitar, and you'd sing folk songs until 5 in the morning.
I was in Berlin for 1 year.
I don't get to do that anymore, so I completely understand what you're saying. What I would say is that although the process of getting tickets is more complicated than it used to be, there are still tickets available. It's just what's hard to do is to sit down, and if you're trying to see Argo and Silver Linings Playbook on the first weekend, forget it. It's just it's too stressful. But all of the other films that are so interesting, a lot of the work that Andréa's programming and that Dimitri's programming, I'm programming, smaller films perhaps that are playing not in the galas and big special presentation theaters, see those movies and you can get tickets to them, and the process is actually not that complicated.
I would just suggest to you that in the last 5 years, TIFF has gotten easier to do in many respects. And
Trust this woman, she is a power user of TIFF.
I see 6 movies a day, so I know what I'm talking about. And I'm saying, the reason I'm saying this is because they've got a policy now where they literally put aside tickets for the day of the screening. And they hold those things and they don't give them out, even for people like me who are trying. Once a ticket's been returned, for example, to a screening, that usually it's just started that last year, I think.
That's right.
If I had a ticket for Hannah Arendt and I decide I'm not going to go and I swap it, they won't sell it again, and they'll leave it for the day of performance. So it's so much easier now to see movies at TIFF than it was 5 years ago, because it would sell out, and then you didn't have a hope and heck, and you'd have to go and do the rush thing. Now it's so much easier, and you can do it online. The online system's gotten a lot easier. So I would say TIFF has gotten a lot easier for people to see movies during the festival, and they've done a really good job about that for people who leave it to the last minute and who may not be doing a lot of planning and seeing a lot of movies.
That's still a fun way to go to the festival. I don't think, some people like to plan out absolutely everything down to the minute, but I think it's fun to just wake up in the morning and decide if you want to see a movie and then use the same day tickets.
Yeah.
I'm getting too old.
I'm 66. Yeah, well, there.
Somehow, there's Cameron's dating
get up
in the morning. Go with
early
it.
every day, 5, 6 o'clock, but for another purpose, and I don't think, I'm very busy, but
Well, I was going to ask you folks, because I know these folks, most of them, but I'm really big on movies, but I've wanted to do Berlin. I'd like to do the Berlinale as a film festival, because it is a public festival. So what would your advice be to somebody who's never done it before? I know, Andrea, you were saying how Cameron gave you some orientation tips and things like that. Is there certain things if I was telling people, if you want to do TIFF and you want to do it seriously, you got to know a couple things, like the tickets are going on sale. Last year they changed it at the end of June, so you got to know the dates. If you want to buy a bunch of tickets, you got to know the timelines and things like that. And if you might even want to get a little bit of help about sorting out how to select your tickets or something like that.
Have a sleeping bag?
Yeah. So what's your advice around the
In the
Berlinale?
Center.
about if you want to-
my local friends in Berlin cannot get tickets. The tickets office opens at 7 a.m. People sleep all night. There's a mall, the
Arkaden, yes.
Mall, which is at Potsdamer Platz. And I'm getting up to see the 8:30 a.m. press screenings, and I'm walking through the mall because it's so cold, and I see all these sleeping bags. People have been there all night long waiting for tickets. I mean, it's a hugely popular festival, but their houses are very, very big. But they house thousands of people in the Friedrichspalast, and they have multiple screenings, like 4 public screenings of almost everything. So there are always opportunities, but it's a very, very busy festival, and yes, you'd have to plan ahead.
I don't know if they have a rush system like we do, you know? I'm not sure.
They do. You stand in rush.
None of you do it public-wise, right? You're all doing
Yeah.
industry things, right?
And honestly,
So
I
you
keep
don't know.
saying, if
You
I
don't
didn't have
know.
a pass,
I mean, it depends on, it'd be hard to see 6 films a day,
So-
right, without that kind of access.
I do have a question. When you do I do, industry, stuff, but it's not the same feeling sometimes. Sometimes you want to have that component as a programmer, that component of the public, especially if it's a, quite a, open mind and looking for the numbers, So how you
I
deal with
completely
that?
agree. I mean, as often as possible, I'll go to public screenings. Can't always do that, and sometimes you just have to let the film work on you, whether you're seeing it, with 2,000 people in public or with a guy on his BlackBerry beside you, which happens in some of the industry screenings. And it's possible to do that, and it's actually really exciting. And from years back, I remember going to some of the public screenings of films and being able to go up to the filmmaker right after the screenings, or being sort of mobbed by the audience and invite the film to Toronto right away. And it's thrilling because you actually feel like you're part of that celebration of the film. So that's definitely nice to do. But I think, if you've been doing this for a long time, you really don't need the audience reaction. It's a nice addition sometimes, but you should be able to just respond to the film itself.
But also for films that you'd like to see, there are no press screenings. So the whole Form
Yeah,
Expanded
exactly,
section
for
is combined. It's for press, accreditation, and public, similarly to what we do for the choice programs on Wavelength. So it's combined.
That's another experience.
It's a completely other
Yeah.
experience, yeah.
Question back here?
Could it be a more symbiotic kind of relationship where perhaps a package of 20 films would, now that you have TIFF as a facility, could transfer, and vice versa, from Toronto transfer to Berlin, instead of just talking about it and living vicariously off your fabulous experiences, actually see some of these movies.
Sure.
Because these facilities are there, aren't they? It's technically possible, isn't it? I just leave that.
Oh, you mean like
Like a
That's
series
like the
While the
opera?
Berlinale is happening, to have.
No, afterwards, like
Yeah.
at this time now.
Yeah.
Like the best of the
Have
films.
a series of 10, 20 movies, the greatest hits sort of thing.
I mean, this is slightly different, but what Sonia mentioned at the beginning, the Goethe-Institut was a really great partner for us at the Cinematheque in 2006, 2007, where we did a whole focus on the New Berlin School. These are young, up-and-coming auteurs from Berlin. They're not all from Berlin, but they're called the Berlin School because they studied in Berlin. And most of these were Toronto premieres that hadn't played TIFF before, and I couldn't have done that work without attending the Berlinale for a number of years and getting to know the filmmakers and some of the critics there. And we were surprised at how successful it was. And we brought in Thomas Alsacer to give a talk, and then we did a sidebar of Christian Petzold's work, Thomas Arslan, and filmmakers that we're still tracking now. So I think that worked really well. I mean, it was very specific and very tightly curated, but all of that came from the Berlinale. And a number of other things. I mean, the time that Berlin Alexanderplatz was restored, the Fassbinder, I was there for the restoration. We spoke with the Fassbinder Foundation. That's how that happened through the Berlinale. World on a Wire, Fassbinder's sci-fi film that made for TV, that showed up at the Lightbox because I had that deal made with the Berlinale. So these things are happening piecemeal-wise. I don't know if they could happen anymore.
It's actually not clear to me how much people who love movies and go to see movies need or use the filter of a film festival. So if a film is branded, this came from the Berlinale, does that actually make a difference to you? Or is it the film itself that
Yeah,
it does?
walking down memory lane with this lady here, it's been ingrained, it's cultural, yes, it's strong.
Okay.
And another thing I wanted to add that usually, again, going down memory lane, there would be many movies would come back to Toronto and play in the repertory cinemas. Now, the repertory cinemas are more dedicated to obscure and really obscure material. You don't get reruns like The Year of the Tiger, the Chilean film from a year ago, which still haunts me. Like
Gloria is his new film.
I was just going to say it's good.
It's the same director.
Yeah, exactly.
You're gonna want to see Gloria.
I think to talk around maybe your comment about getting a series, say, of like the package of films. I think that on the upside, I think distributors with the rise of festivals and their importance, have been paying more attention to the fact that they want films that have these kinds of the laurels on them, and not just any laurels, but the ones from the top 5 film festivals in the world. And it's the success of these films, for example, Barbara, that has major festival laurels that got the attention of these distributors and then ends up as runs. I think we've had in the past couple of years, not just at our venue, but venues everywhere, more commercial release of festival films than in the past. So I think in a year you could sort of make up what's played in, for example, Berlinale or Sundance or whatever in our town, and TIFF films elsewhere. If you look at a year of releases in a city like that, I see so many difficulties, not problems, but difficulties at putting together a recent collection of, say, films that were in Berlin a few months ago. Like, they will all want to hold their premieres for a festival, not a film series.
I'm not sure.
And is it a meaningful
carryover?
category?
Like, I'm an avid film
Yeah.
fan, and I don't see that fallout over the year that you mentioned. Maybe I'm not discerning enough, but I used to plot to see movies I've seen already over the next year. They don't come back. Like, they don't seem to come back. Maybe I'm not being receptive enough.
It's an interesting idea. It is complicated to do for lots of different reasons, partly because there is a very complex thicket of film distribution and rights holding that would have to all sync up properly to be able to bring a package of films from Berlin. Some of them will have Canadian distributors, some of them will not. Some of those Canadian distributors will want to hold the film for another date or for the festival in September. Some of them will want to play it elsewhere first. So all of these things are factors that would have to be negotiated. Not saying it's not possible, just that it's a big job for you.
It is. But most of, I would say, like, not to well, I guess we preach for the choir because we're together and that's what we're talking about. But if you look at our lineup right now, is most, if not all, films that we play commercially at Lightbox have been at Cannes or Berlin or Sundance or TIFF. Literally, it's rare that one film has not.
Just to name German films.
It's really, it's sort of, our commercial deal is sort of the festival, what we can bring out of those festivals and try to give them a run. Some are 1 week runs, so many people will not even, see it happen. And some last much longer than we thought. Yeah. But it's tough. There are much less repertory cinemas in this city alone than there were before. I mean, they close all the time, and sometimes they reopen, but they don't only do, say, third runs of Hollywood movies. So right there, a lot of houses have become third runs of Hollywood movies, which is very unfortunate. Let's hope that the few that are there right now can keep doing it. I mean, the Royal Cinema, for example, is fulfilling a great need for young Canadian filmmakers to get up on screen. We cannot do all of the work of everything that needs to be on screen, and we cannot show all of these Canadian films necessarily. And the Royal has sort of taken a lead in that. The Bloor Hot Docs shows like, we love docs and we show big docs, but there's a lot of other ones that need a house, and they fulfilled that. So I think people are starting to figure out, I think this year, like with those two specifically, how to complement one another and not just play against each other until someone dies again.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, for those of you who are German speakers, are there places online where you can find, say, German films that have played at the Berlinale? Are there sort of Netflix equivalents or iTunes equivalents where you go specifically for German films?
Interestingly enough, last week one launched. It's
Oh.
called Alles Kino, and it touts to put every single German film online. We'll see. It's headed by a couple of big names in the business. Runs the Filmförderung. I mean, I'll be curious to see it happen. It would be spectacular on a sort of pay-per-view kind of basis.
Like
currently, they currently have some free teasers, interesting ones, by the way. That is new. I guess there was a gap. I mean, I have a festival scope account,
Right.
which is very
Yes,
nice.
you can see
That
it on
has,
there,
and the
actually.
Goethe-Institut has a special deal with them. The Goethe also buys film rights for us to then show non-profit around the world, and we have about 25 German films at any given time on the festival scope. But I think you have to be professionally accredited. I don't
You
know
do,
because
yeah.
I'm logged in.
It's for people
Right.
within the film
Right, yeah.
world, film industry. And of course, we're ambivalent about online viewing of films. It's a great way to access movies,
Yeah.
but we still think that showing movies in a movie theater is
It's our busiest.
worthwhile. Yes. So, but that is another way that you can find films that are otherwise not available.
A question for you. The TIFF does the film circuit, right? I don't know how much the Goethe-Institut is involved with film circuit programming, because I know you do Canadian but international films as well, right? So when you're at the Berlinale, you don't think about, oh, this might be something we could promote through the film circuit?
For sure. So the circuit is the branch of TIFF that brings interesting films, to put it simply, across the country to communities that are underserved. Say they, for example, say in Ontario there's literally, 70 of them, but for example in Port Hope, if you want to go see a film, it's likely just going to be Spider-Man and films like that. So people, volunteers there, it's not TIFF staff, but volunteers there start a film club, film group, and will help them get the film. So a lot of Canadian films, but say 25% Canadian films, and the rest are international films. And yeah, for sure. Like I came back with my list and literally we all tried to help as many of each other within the large company that we are, organizations. Evil corporation. And yes, of course, so I worked slightly on film circuit, but only for Francophone groups in Canada, which are only 4 of, so it's not that much, but my colleagues that do the Anglophone groups, which is literally like 180 of them, right away came back and I said, these 5 films that I saw are absolute circuit material. And that's great for distributors. Distributors do not have, they would have never booked these films in, say one film will be booked in 110 places. They would not have had access to that. And they go through the circuit through us and do that. So yeah, like some of these films are definitely likely to be on the circuit list.
I had a question. I was curious about the differences in the audiences in Berlin versus Toronto, because I know in Toronto, and also how the filmmakers perceive it. Because what I see is a lot of filmmakers love Toronto audiences because they see us as a litmus test for sort of some generic North American or worldwide audience, how people will react to films.
Yeah.
Do the filmmakers look at the German audiences the same way?
It's a great question,
Yeah.
and the answer is no. And please chime in, but in my experience, the Toronto audience is known all throughout the film world as being among the most enthusiastic and actually informed as well audiences that you can find as a filmmaker. So they're ready to embrace your movie. They come into the theater, I think, wanting to like your movie rather than wanting to hate your movie. I'm not saying that that's the opposite in Berlin, but in Berlin, and I've witnessed many Q&As in Berlin, there is a severity to the questions that you don't find in Toronto. Toronto audience typically a member will get up after the film and say, I loved your movie, here's what it meant to me, and it made me think of this or feel this. And in Berlin, they might have an ideological critique that is very hard to answer.
It has a name. It's called Streitkultur.
Yeah.
Yes. It's more like a statement, and then they walk out the door. And the film has happened, but everybody's still there. They make their grand statement, and they walk out the door. But they waited to the end of the film.
Not for an answer, but
I mean, the one thing, I was there with a lot of filmmakers this year who we had presented, and what was really nice to hear is that they said that they felt really close to the programmers here, and that they knew that everybody was really busy in Berlin, but there were some instances where the programmer is not actually meeting the filmmaker or introducing their film. And so I had a number of filmmakers say, you were at each and every one of my screenings, and we had a great dialogue together. And in Berlin, everybody's very nice, but it was just the front of staff person came and gave me a microphone. And
you know what, that even extends to audiences, I think. Because you guys, and I know you do it very consciously as a company or organization, that you have faces. You know, people know Andréa and Magali and Cameron. and you've been getting flack for it in Germany, and it's sort of
Is that
embedded.
right?
Really?
I'm curious.
Sometimes it's good that you can't read all the German media.
I
You know,
think
this whole discussion
it
of
just turns
is
out-
the programmer more important than the film and the
right,
filmmaker
yes.
and the audience?
Uber
right?
marketing.
Yeah,
is what I was
you
hearing.
know what, I'm
Yeah,
all
yeah.
with you, so
Yeah.
I always defend that approach. But it is a very conscious discussion, I think, having.
Yeah. But I think when it comes down to having a personal relationship with the filmmaker, that's a little bit different in walking them through the festival experience, which we cannot always do. You cannot do it because
Of
you're
course
too
not,
busy.
no.
But as much as possible, I think we try to be at the screenings that matter to us, particularly with filmmakers that we have relationships with. And again, I was hearing from filmmakers that they felt a little bit lost. But they, conversely, like the cinemas are packed, you know, for screenings of a really small Argentinian film and 500 people a night. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah,
Incredible.
that is a
Yeah.
difference, I think, between Toronto and Berlin. We struggle with some films that do not have known directors. They might be new filmmakers. The films might be challenging in terms of the content or the form. And there's a kind of we have an understanding of how many people we can get to those screenings during the festival. It seems in Berlin they can just do that. They can get large audiences to, I think, the most challenging films in a way.
Just
that-
everything.
Yeah,
No,
regardless,
no,
it's
across the board,
amazing.
it's
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
But it's
Astonishing.
not, like, it's a little bit of a paradox to think, I lived in Germany for a little bit, and what I remember is that you can only see English films like dubbed into German. They'll wait a long time. So the question is, I mean, in Toronto, it seems like throughout the year, there are people with an appetite for foreign films. It's not just a once-a-year TIFF experience. People throughout the year will watch them and seek them out. And in Germany, is it a question that it's this one festival where they watch foreign films, or do they watch foreign films throughout the
No, I
year?
don't think it's that one.
It's
Okay.
actually to the point where the top 10 overall theater released films last year, number 10 was the first German film, and that was one of those multi-culti Turkish comedies from made for TV, very funny one. And everything else was not a German film. So we're kind of having sometimes
Were they
the
dubbed, or were they actually subtitled?
They're dubbed, but that's Europe. I mean, it's worse than Eastern Europe where everything is dubbed, voiced over the original language. Like if you've ever been to Russia,
Italy.
Italy even, right? Yeah. So it's funny. The dubbing is funny. I perceive it as funny now, but it comes out in that language. It comes out pretty fast. It's just like the book market. We always get that question about the book market. Well, Margaret Atwood's book is out 2 weeks later in Germany. It will top the charts. That's how it is.
So they want,
French
so in
film
Germany,
is number
they'll,
one.
they embrace foreign films,
Yeah.
but in the German language.
Yes. Other than, for example, I think only the Scandinavians and the Dutch, they're the only ones that subtitle in.
But there's also
On
the
TV
Deutsche
film.
Kinemathek and the Arsenal who are doing retrospectives all year round, similarly to our Cinemathek. I mean, I think I've heard from my colleagues at the Arsenal that they really suffer from being in the Sony Center at Potsdamer Platz, that aside from the Berlinale, people don't want to go there. They don't want to go there for culture. But, you know, the flip side is that the Gamaldi Gallery is there, the Neue Gallery is there, and the Philharmonic's there. So there is so much culture in this
But
oddly
it's
architecture
like
place.
culture, it's like going to Young and Dundas for
Yeah,
serious art house
exactly.
cinema. It just
Yeah.
feels a little odd. Yeah.
Berlin, that's
Yeah.
it.
So they've been wanting to relocate for a long time because they feel like they can reach a younger audience.
Then you go to the crematorium.
Then you go to the crematorium.
Perfect. I was wondering, for me, and maybe for a lot of the people here, one of the fun things for me at film festival is to make a personal discovery of an actor who just gives a performance that you've never seen this person before, and it just blows you away. You feel like you found a new talent, and the same with the director or something like that. Was there did you see anything new? Because I mean, most of the stuff you talked about has been about new works by established directors or talent. So is there something new that just blew you away? Like, oh, this is somebody we have to watch going forward?
Let me think.
Yes, for me.
Strangely
Yeah,
cast.
in the forum. So I'm always looking for new, young, German talent because I think that that's what the forum is set up for. And also another interesting thing about the Berlinale is that I never ever go to the Perspective Deutsche Kino, which they have a whole section set up for German cinema. And I'm always making my discoveries either in the competition or the forum films. And I don't know if you could speak to that at all. Like, none of my colleagues actually attend the
Really?
perspective.
You don't go
It's
to
classic. I
Epic
mean,
either?
it's like unfortunately, it's seen as kind of a catch-all for films that
Yeah.
they have to show because they're German.
Yeah.
But the films that they really are behind that are German,
gonna
they put in other
take them
sections.
in other sections,
It's sad,
yeah.
but that's how it.
But so I'm always looking for new young talent from Germany, and I think I found one this year. The film is called The Strange Little Cat. You can give me the German translation.
Das merkwürdige Kätzchen.
And his last name is Zercher. Roman
Yeah.
Zercher.
Again,
Yeah.
so new that.
So new. I mean, he's still in
you know,
school. He's
yeah.
at the DFB, which is the prestigious film school there, and it was his graduate project. And it was supposed to be a short film, and then some of his professors told him, they encouraged him to turn it into a feature film. And Bellatar was somehow an advisor to him, a great Hungarian.
Is that a
filmmaker.
good thing or a bad
It's
thing?
a very good thing. It's a very good thing. This is no turn horse. But
Surprisingly good teacher.
it is a chamber piece. I mean, the Germans are very good about making domestic dramas with really, with economical means and with a lot of tension. And it's essentially about a family whose children come back from school, and so they throw a dinner and they invite the extended family, and it's just preparing the meal. But every one of them kind of wants to make a confession to one another, but nobody's really listening to them. And I really do not like magic realism at all. It kind of goes off into these small fantasies that are not really fantasies. Like, he really rides that line in a really smart way. And just to use film terms, like, he blocks his actors. The choreography is so perfect in the film. The cat's great in the film. The children's amazing in the film. I mean, it was very well received. I think the German press really liked it, Variety, Screen, and so we've found young new talent.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think Magali has to go do an
Yes,
intro.
we really have to wrap it up now that everybody's coming up with questions, which just gave me a brilliant idea. Let's do this again next year.
Yes.